All right, thank you for being here. It's 8 o'clock at night. This is weird that we have talks this late, but I really appreciate that you're here. So with that, we're going to talk about rethinking pen testing. I am Mike Saunders. I'm the principal consultant at Red Siege. I have been in IT a long time. I'm glad to see some older faces here. The last time I gave this talk was at a university, and I realized that I started my IT career before most of the people listening to the talk were born. So I've been in IT a long time. I've been in security for the last 17 years or so full time. Do some stuff, write some tools, write some blogs. Mainly I hack so I can spend time outside doing photography and things like that. So if you follow me on Instagram, you will see that lots of my feed is nature photos and not so much InfoSec. It goes back and forth. I forgot to tell you, if you want a copy of the slides, there will be a link available at the end where you can see them, but also it's at redsiege.com/rethink. So you can get a copy of the slides if you want. Feel free to take screenshots, but you probably don't need to. So before we get started, if you thought this was like a hacking talk where I'm going to drop cool tools and techniques, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, this is not that talk. We're going to be talking about some ideas, processes about how I think that we're doing testing wrong, ways I think that we can do testing better. So if that's what you were here for, I'm not offended if you want to go hear something else. But why am I here? So I am here because I think that I think pen testing is broken. So when I say pen testing is broken, let me clarify. So the way we do traditional internal network pen testing, right? Like we ship a Kali box to the customer's network, or we come in with one, we plug it on their network, we start running mass scan and scanning all this stuff, and then lobbing exploits everywhere and running all the Metasploit things that we can find, and just trying to find all of the issues. And that is fine. That is a fine way to do the test. You find a lot of issues. However, I don't think it's representative of the threats that, if you are a blue teamer, it's not representative of the threats that you're going to face in the real world, and I'm not emulating real world threats. At least I hope not. I don't think there's a lot of instances where attackers are walking in and dropping a Kali box on your network and running all those scans. So I don't think that model of pen testing is realistic. I don't think it's necessarily the most beneficial way to do it. However, I do think this last bullet point down here, of course the pointer can't see it, it's the most likely to identify like vulnerabilities. And when I say vulnerabilities, I mean like exploitable vulnerabilities that you fix with a patch or require a firewall, things like that. Because of the nature of the kinds of testing I'm going to be talking about. This finds vulnerabilities. A lot of the things that we find in like red team, purple team, assume breach is finding their vulnerabilities, but lots of times they're abuse of the way things work versus they're an issue because someone didn't patch something. So that's the differentiation I'm making here. The internal pen test model does serve a purpose. However, if you are a company that has had several internal pen tests, you've been making progress, you've fixed those issues, kind of becomes diminishing returns. I don't think that you get as much out of those tests, and I think that there are better ways to get more value, and that's what I want to talk about. So I think that a better way to get more value out of testing is to have a kind of test where you simulate threats that you might face. And what kind of threats might you face? Well, it depends on who you are. If you are a type of government agency or a large technology company that's producing, chips, or you're Microsoft or you're something like that, that's a different threat than you're going to face if you're kind of a mom and pop business that's in the local town and just has a small network. You still can see the same kind of actors for like the ransomware kinds of things, but the really targeted attacks, the more sneaky nation state attacks, you certainly probably aren't going to be a target of that unless you're a front for the CIA. So I think that there are better ways that we can test that serves most industries, and that's doing things like assumed breach and purple teams and red teams. But when I say those terms, what does that mean? So I went out and I looked at a bunch of other companies that are in the same space that we are. Red Siege, we're a offensive security company. All we do is offensive security. So I looked at other companies in the space. What do they do? Like, what kind of tests do they have? And I looked at their menu of offerings and like, what do they have? And these were all kind of words that represented the same kind of testing. When you read what those tests were, they're all kind of the same thing. Some people call it a pivot test. Some people call it threat modeling, threat emulation, attack simulation, comprehensive testing. So there's all these different terms, and they sometimes mean the same thing, sometimes they mean different things. And I started thinking about this talk because we get clients that come to us and they're like, we want a red team. And you ask them what they think that term means. And I've literally had people say, like, we want you to red team our web app. And I was like, what does that mean to you? And they're like, well, we're not going to give you any credentials. Are you going to let me phish your users or social engineers? Like, no, we just want you to attack it without credentials. Like, okay, so unauthenticated web app testing, got it. But someone went to a conference and heard the term red team, and you have to do red team, and so they came back and told their security team, we need a red team on our app. And so someone comes and asks for a red team on their app, and they don't know what red team means. And really, if you ask anyone in the industry what red team means, you'll get a different answer from just about everyone. So we're going to talk about the different kinds of testing. I'm going to talk about red teams, I'm going to talk about assumed breach, and I'm going to talk about purple teams as kind of three distinct entities and what I think they mean. And keep in mind, this is just my opinion, informed by people that I work with and people I respect, but you might have a different interpretation, and if you do, that's fine. So red teams. When we think about red teams, I'm talking about like sophisticated techniques, more advanced techniques where you're trying to emulate a specific kind of threat. Sometimes they say, we want to emulate APT XYZ. And so we're doing exactly those techniques that they're doing. Other times we want to emulate the things that you're seeing just across current APTs and what they're doing, and trying to build tactics that match those. But different people call these things, these tests. We call them red teams, adversarial attack simulations, threat emulation, like that one, comprehensive testing. So you got to figure out just like, what does this even mean? And if you're a consumer, if you're someone who's going to hire me and come for these tests, like, you need to understand what it is that you want so that you can get value out of it. And I need to understand what you want so I can sell you the right service, because I don't want to just make money. Like, I want to make money so I can go out and take pictures of birds, but I don't want to do that by selling you the thing that you don't need. So I want to find out what is the thing you actually need. So we got to understand these terms. And in a red team, like I said, we're emulating some type of more sophisticated attacker. A lot of times that looks like starting on the outside, unauthenticated, and our client will tell us, this is our domain name, go forth and hack. And so that's probably going to involve phishing. It might involve vishing, smishing. I want to punch myself in the face with all these terms. Alex on our team just came up with, what did he call it? Shishing, with an SSH type, interesting SSH vector. So we're starting out from the outside, trying to get access to the inside. And during these tests, we're trying to evade detection, trying to get persistence, trying to move laterally. Red teams are almost always goal focused. If someone sells you a red team and they're not trying to focus on specific goals, like ask, not like projectors. So hopefully that doesn't happen a bunch. Note to self, just use the work laptop from now on. So the red teams are goal focused. So the clients will say, we want you to get in and maybe we want you to stay undetected for 6 weeks. That's the goal. Or maybe we want you to get in and we want you to be undetected, but you need to get access to this database server or this application here and steal certain kinds of information. So there are goals, not just smash and grab. These campaigns are expensive. Our red teams start at a minimum of 6 weeks, usually 8 weeks. I know people in the industry that they start their red teams at 12. They start at 12 weeks. So these are very expensive tests. So if you're going to do this test, you should really be prepared. It's kind of like that meme of everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. I think that Mike Tyson thing. It's like Mike Tyson fighting a preschooler. If you haven't done a bunch of internal pen tests before and fixed those issues and you hire a red team, you wasted a lot of money and you had a bad time. So these are long campaigns, they're goal focused. And I think most importantly, the last bullet, this isn't about testing your defenses. This is about testing your defenders. So we are going to be bumping up against your defenses and figuring out what EDR do you have. If we've got to fish in, we probably got to get through multiple layers of phishing detection and things like that. And then we got to get through meat space and get someone to click something. And then we got to get past the EDR. But once we're in, there's been a lot of signals already that could have gotten us detected. And then when we're running, there is telemetry that's happening. And we're trying to see, can you detect us? And if we've been in a campaign for a long time, usually the client, if we haven't gotten caught, they want us to start making more noise. And we start raising that noise floor to the point that someone notices that we're there. So do they see the smoke? No, they don't see the smoke. Getting hot in here. Do they see anything yet? No. There's flames. Does anyone notice yet? And trying to raise that up till we see where people can detect us. And then we're testing their ability to respond. Hopefully we have multiple methods of persistence through multiple communication channels. So even if they kick us out on one account and they burn one C2, we have other accounts and we have other comms channels that we can use using different signals and different tooling so that even if they burn one side, we still have persistence on the other. And so now it's this cat and mouse game. So red teams are really, in my opinion, focused on that. But there is a big problem with red teams. I said they're long, and they start out with a lot of research. Is anyone here who is a pen tester? Okay. All right, we've got a bunch of people. Anyone here that wants to be a pen tester? Okay, and for those of you that raise your hand that you want to be a pen tester, is the thing that you want to do red teams? They're so boring. They're so boring. Because there's weeks of research and OSINT and crafting the right fish and then sending your fish and just being like, come on, click. Click. And sometimes they don't click because guess what? You never actually got in the inbox. You got caught by the mail filter. And then you see eventually a callback from some strange IP that's checking out your phishing server and it's like, well, blue team found the fish and no one clicked. So now we have to start the campaign over again. So they are weeks of boredom punctuated by extreme fun and energy. So they're a lot of fun for us, but they're expensive because they take a long time and clients are like, why aren't you doing anything? It's been 4 weeks, we don't see anything. And it was like, well, we've been spending a lot of time doing research, right? Like they see just the top. They don't see the weeks of research, building tooling, figuring out what EDR they have and what mail protection they have, trying to figure out how do we get a current bypass for that technology stack before we can ever send a fish. Before we can ever start even the attack, we've got to have the tool chain built. And so they think that nothing's happening, and it's like, no, there's a lot of work happening, and this is what you hired us to do. So on the pro side, red teams are really good at helping you understand, like, how are you going to fare against a real-world attacker? And we can model real-world TTPs. On the downside, from a client perspective, this is really expensive. It's going to cost you a lot of money. If someone sells you a red team and it doesn't cost you a lot of money, run. Like seriously, run, because you're not getting a red team, and if it's not going to be good. These campaigns are long. They take a lot of R&D, so there's going to be a lot of time that you don't think anything's happening where work is happening, but you're just not seeing it. And on the downside, and I know this is cliche to say, but attackers have unlimited time. We don't. We might have 8 weeks, and we have 8 weeks to get it right. And people are like, well, all you got to do is fish in and get code execution. But this is the analogy I like to use. It's not threading a needle. It's threading multiple needles, because for the red team to be, successful, let's talk about we're starting on the outside and we want to fish in. I have to get a payload that's going, or a phishing email that's going to get through your phishing defenses. So I've got to have a good domain that's probably aged and categorized. I got to have a message that gets through that filter that will allow me to get to meat space. And once I get to meat space, I got to get the right user with the right ruse on the right day. So that means I have to get the right ruse. I have to get a ruse that resonates with that user, something that's going to entice them to click. And I have to get them on the right day. Because if you think about it, if you're having a bad day, stuff is happening at work, you're distracted, and that email comes in, and you're like, oh, okay, God, I got to take care of that. And you click on it because you were distracted. If it's beautiful and sunny, the birds are chirping, your inbox zero, and an email comes in, you look at that, you're like, not today, Satan. So I got to get the right user with the right ruse on the right day. Like, got to get them on a day that they're not distracted. And then once that happens, I got to hope that my payload gets past EDR and doesn't get blown up. And then I can start operating. And if I got past EDR, now I got to get persistence, because I'm probably in an Office document or some type of ephemeral process that's going to die. The user is going to log out. They're going to close that application, and now I lost my shell. And now I don't have anything. So now I got to get persistence without getting detected. And then I got to move laterally and all that. So there's a lot of things that have to happen right before we can ever really even start operating. So this is just more on that, right? Like that idea. And for red teams to really give you value, you need to be very mature. You need to have a very mature security organization to really benefit from a red team. You've done a lot of internal pen tests and external pen tests. Your users understand phishing threats. You've got a good technology stack that has been proven. You've tested it multiple times. Your IR team is on point. They know how to respond to an incident. You've probably done a few assumed breach type assessments as well. Now you're ready for a red team. We find that the red teams are valuable and effective for those clients that are really prepared. And when a client comes to me and wants a red team, to steal a phrase from John Strand, proudly sucking at capitalism, I'm gonna be like, you need to tell me why you want a red team. You need to justify me why you think you need a red team. Because I want to do the thing that makes me lots of money, but I don't want to do it if it's not going to benefit you. And a 2-week assumed breach might be 500 times more effective for you than an 8-week assumed breach, at a quarter of the cost. So if you're a consumer, think about that. If you're a practitioner that is doing these tests, I encourage you to think about this and talk to your clients about what are their goals, and figuring out that the service that you are providing actually matches their needs. Okay, off the soapbox. So, assume breach. Assume breach can mean a lot of different things. So when I'm talking about assume breach, I'm talking about an assumption that an endpoint has already been compromised, a user has clicked on something, or somehow we have code execution within the network. These can be very red oriented, start out with a zero knowledge. Basically, we have a trusted insider who executes a payload for us that we didn't have a chance to they'll tell us what EDR they have, and we're like, okay, we think this will get past this particular EDR in your technology stack, and they'll run a payload for us. And then we start on the inside and no one knows we're there. Sometimes I've been hired Like I've been onboarded through HR, you know, and actually been an employee. The help desk or the security team noticed it, and they like called me up like, hey, we saw you run this thing. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm working with Jane in HR and I'm helping her develop this survey application that we're going to send to all the people, and I'm just a contractor. Like, I didn't know, I'm sorry, you know. And they're like, oh, okay. And they let my payload run, you know, but I was actually like, looked like legit employee inside the company. And that was a zero knowledge test. On the other side of the spectrum, we've got full knowledge tests where everyone knows we're there, the blue team knows we're there. We're allowed to operate at full tempo, which means now we can cover a lot more ground. Because on the zero knowledge tests, I'm not going to curb roast every spin in your network so I can get it on the cracker, because that's noisy as hell. But I might grab one once an hour, maybe once every 2 hours, and slowly get those in. But in a full knowledge test, I can move at speed. I can collect a lot of data, like I can run a full bloodhound search, grab all the data and start processing that and not have to worry about being noisy. And both of those are of value. Like both approaches are of value depending on what your goal is. When we start an assume breach test, I always want to have a representative user account and a representative workstation. And what I mean by that is I want a user, ideally, like let's say someone has left your organization and you've got a test coming up. Instead of deleting their account, just make it inactive. And then for the test, let's reactivate that account. Give me that account, because you can't get more real world than that. That machine has all the cruft that comes, or that user has all the cruft that comes with being a user and accumulating privileges over time as they maybe moved job roles and applications got added and applications got removed, but rights didn't get removed. And the same thing on the workstation side. If you give me a gold image workstation that is pristine, it probably doesn't have lots of vulnerabilities that you've introduced. For example, I was on a test where the client had notes. They actually had IBM notes on their machine, which was surprising, but they had it. And were able to exploit that privilege escalation vulnerability to get local admin on that machine, which allowed us to do other things. If they had given me their gold image without installing that software, every machine in their company, every workstation in their company was vulnerable to that particular issue, but I couldn't tell them about it unless I somehow got code execution on someone else's workstation. So I want a machine that looks exactly like your user. So if you're going to have me be Bob in accounting, give me Bob in accounting's rights and Bob in accounting's machine. Ideally his machine, because he probably has passwords.txt or a spreadsheet or saved in OneNote or something. And that is real world. An attacker is going to use those if they get access to that account. So let's show you a real world impact. If not, at least give me a machine, an account that's cloned from a real user so it has like the same rights as a normal user. And give me a machine that has all the software that that user would have on it. Like that's a good starting point. And then I can start to show you the impact of what would happen if that particular user got breached. Now that's a different impact than someone over in IT, right? That's a different test. Maybe there are some overlapping things that we find when you talk about like ADCS vulnerabilities and, you know, screwy rights assignments in AD and all kinds of things like that. But they're two different starting points that could have two very different pictures. Again, on an assumed breach, there are goals, and the goals kind of depend on the client. Like if they want coverage, they want us to find as much as possible, then we want to do overt testing. We don't want to have to try to hide from the blue team. So we're not trying to evade, we're focusing on tempo and getting as much done as possible. On the other hand, if the client wants to verify that we think that we can detect X, Y, and Z, maybe we do a more slow tempo assessment that's much closer to a red team and try to test that theory. Like, okay, we think that we can detect lateral movement recon and lateral movement opportunities. All right, let's maybe try to prove that out. Or maybe we want to test how the blue team responds to an actual incident, but we don't have to pay for all the research that happens up front with the red team. So we do it that way. So that is another way that we can do those kinds of assessments. On the plus side of an assumed breach, very similar to a red team, kind of the same thing. Real world tactics, real world techniques, you get to understand how you fare against that. On the downside, very similar to a red team. When we have a limited amount of time, we have to operate faster. If we don't operate faster, we're not going to find much. So now you paid for an assessment that we didn't do much because you wanted us to hide, and that happens. Like we get there, and sometimes clients are like, nope, we're not disabling anything, and you have to evade detection, and it's a 1-week engagement. It's like, okay, so the focus is, in this case, is not about finding nearly as many issues in the environment as the focus is on testing the blue team. These aren't focused on vulnerabilities. I said that before. Like sometimes we find them like local privilege escalation vulnerabilities. Sometimes we see that, hey, there is this software out here and we know that software is vulnerable to something, and so we're going to try to exploit that. But a lot of times we're not firing any exploits. We're abusing AD, we're abusing how people misconfigure systems, and really abusing just Windows in general, how it works versus running exploits. And on the downside for us, if we don't get a representative workstation and a representative user account, it's really hard for us to give you a really good impact. And unfortunately, we do see that sometimes. Clients just like, nope, you're going to get a gold image and an account that is a member of domain users, and that's it. Which is unfortunate, but also then, like I take it as a challenge, and I was like, now I'm definitely not going to lose, so game on. But it makes it much tougher. It's harder to demonstrate this is what would happen in a real world scenario for you. The next thing is purple teams, which ostensibly means red and blue makes purple. So red and blue working together. What does a purple team look like? Boy, the possibilities are endless depending on what you want to get out of it, really. Sometimes we want to emulate specific threats. So clients will be like, hey, these are the specific targets we want you to hit. And we build techniques and tooling to match those targets that they want us to hit. And then we sit down and we just play through them. And they say, you know what, we weren't able to detect that. Let us go back and retool that. And can we run that again in a half hour? And then we come back and do that. Or other times they say like, okay, now that we detected that, can you change that technique a bit to make sure that our signatures aren't too brittle? So like, can they change it and still detect us if we change the technique a bit? Sometimes these are very goal-focused, trying to test their assumptions. We can detect curb roasting. Clients like, we can detect curb roasting 100% of the time. It's like, okay, let's try it. And so I curb roasted like 150 accounts in their network. And I'm like, we don't see anything. Try it again. Okay, pick a different DC and try it again. They could detect curb roasting on one DC. They did not, you have to deploy those detections the way they were doing it to every DC, and they were only collecting telemetry from one DC. So of the 50 DC, and on that one machine, they could see everything. So we're testing assumptions. We're validating that the investments that they've made in security were a good investment. Yes, you can detect lateral movement. Like let's say we're looking for file shares. So we start looking for open file shares across the network. So we're probing port 445 everywhere. Can you detect that? Hopefully you should be able to detect that. And that is a really good way to identify attacker, because attackers are looking for files lots of times. They want to find files, and they have to do that on file shares. And people access file shares all the time, but people don't normally access every file share in the company at once, you know, or just all of them sequentially really fast. Can you detect that? So we want to help them identify gaps in their visibility and their processes. For instance, I was working with the team, and they were able to, we did ADCS, got privilege escalation, and compromised the domain, and then eventually they locked my account, like they had detected me. And I was like, okay, it's game over. We had ratcheted the noise up and it's game over. And then I'm sitting there and this machine hadn't locked yet, and I just decided to do a net user query, and I got information back, and I was like, wait a second, my account is locked, but I'm getting information from the domain. My session is still valid because they didn't kick me out of the machine I was on. They just locked my account, and they didn't kick me off the VPN, so I still VPN'd into their network. And they're like, we didn't have that in our playbook. All right, well now you do. You know, we tested an assumption that they could eradicate an attacker, and we found gaps in that process. So I think that purple teams are really good that way, and I love purple teams because it's very collaborative. I hate going in when it's just like, do the test, give a report, and there's no interaction. Like, I think the client gets more value out of it, and I get more value out of it if I'm able to work hand in hand with someone at the company, and like we can pivot in the middle of a test. And I've had clients that be like, hey, this new vulnerability just dropped. Are we, you know, can we test that out? It's like, I'm gonna need to go read for a bit, but if you're okay taking some time to go do that and see, you know, what I need to do, they're like, yeah, let's do that. And that turned out to be something that was very, very valuable for them. And we didn't have a prescriptive approach where we say, this is the box that you fit in and we're only gonna do these things. You know, we wanna be reactive. And so I think purple teams are the most fun types of tests that I do, and I think they're some of the more valuable. On the plus side, you can confirm detections and defenses, and you can find where you have gaps in visibility, and they're very collaborative, they're very reactive. Downside, again, not focused on vulnerabilities, not necessarily focused on our ability to spread or escalate depending on what your goals are out of the assessment, and receiving a test, you need to be able to give your blue team time to be part of the assessment. I've had companies like hire us for a purple team and then be like, yeah, sorry, we can only get away for an hour every day, and other than that, we got to do other stuff. And it's like, okay, so you got an hour a day to work together, and the rest of it, you're doing other things. Like, you're spending a lot of money and not getting a lot of value. So you got to be willing to invest that time in your team and give them time to work on the thing. So that being said, like, it's probably not a secret that I think the assume breach model is the best way to do testing for most clients. I think it's the most bang for the buck. We like to start with the premise of a compromised user. However, we also will do like the malicious user. Someone finds out they're getting terminated, someone didn't get promoted, they're unhappy with whatever, they decide to be a malicious insider. And those kind of play out a little bit differently, but they start from the same point. Let's have a realistic user account, a realistic workstation. Talked about, you know, if we can't have a actual live machine, let's get one that's a cloned user and something that's as close as we can get to real production machine. If we're doing kind of a compromised user type of path, then I would say that we're going to simulate a user who has clicked on some kind of payload. We now have C2. So we're going to try to establish C2 on the machine, start operating over that C2 like an attacker would, because an attacker isn't going to be sitting there hands on keyboard running commands. They might be able to simulate that by, you know, RDPing into a machine or something like that at some point, but we're going to start before that point. We're going to see what we can do with that access, try to pivot, try to escalate, and play out that scenario. Another option that we can do is, let's just see, this is compromised user, it should really be malicious user. And let's give us a machine. Either we come and sit in your office, or you ship us a machine that's connected to your VPN, and we work with whatever tools are on that machine. What damage could a user do from this workstation with the machines and access that they have? And then maybe we'll spin up C2. Maybe someone's decided to sell access into their network. And you know, I'll run this payload if you give me, you know, $10,000. Okay, now we try running a payload. So the question is, in these kinds of tests, should AV be enabled or disabled? Who thinks AV should be enabled during the test? Who thinks AV should be disabled during the test? Who thinks you should ask the client what their goals are before they do the test? Thank you. That's the right answer. Like, we like to start with AV being enabled or EDR being enabled. However, on any given day, we might be able to get past your EDR, but we might not. You know, I've been in situations where on Friday I had a bypass, it worked perfectly. On Monday, a rule update had been pushed over the weekend, and now I don't have code execution, and now I have to get code execution again. And I've had that happen in the middle of a test. Payload works like Monday morning, and Monday afternoon it doesn't work. It was like, well, now what? So you should have that conversation with the client before the engagement starts, during your kickoff call. Talk about, is there a level up card? And if anyone knows Justin LZ, Hackin' LZ on Twitter, that's kind of like his motto is like, start with AV enabled, ask for and agree on some type of level up card. Like, if we do not have code execution by noon on Tuesday, let's either allow this payload to run or disable endpoint protection or place it in monitor mode, whatever, on only the initial access host. We're not doing this across the network, only on the initial host, because now we can start to operate and find the issues. If we don't do that, it becomes a test of your EDR. And then, you know, you're paying me to test just your EDR, and hopefully I can get around that. And that's happened. Like, I've been on a test where it was a 3-week assume breach test, and on day one, the client's like, actually, I just want to see if you can get around Carbon Black. And so for the next 3 weeks, I want you to find the ways that you can get around Carbon Black. You know, it's like, okay, I mean, if that's what you find value in. But, and he understood that's what he wanted. But sometimes clients want us to find the thing, but expect us to be able to get past Sentinel-1. And it was like, well, we can't do it every day. Some days we win and some days we don't. And I'm not too proud to tell you that I can't get around it. I need some help. You know, and I think they be willing to do that. Clients appreciate that. So it's time to buy, or it's time to sell if you are someone who does these kinds of tests. So if you're someone who wants to buy a pen test, what are your goals? You should be asking yourself before you ever pick up the phone to call me. What is it that you want out of this engagement? What do you want this thing to prove? Think about that, and then, you know, we'll design from there. So do you want to test detections and controls? Do you want to identify misconfigurations? Do you want to see if you can get someone to start from the outside, no knowledge, they fish their way in, get code execution, persistence, and lateral movement? You want a red team. All right, great, you understand that. That's what you want. And then you're like, I can afford $30,000. I'm like, okay, let's do an assume breach. But know what your goals are and know what your budget is. And when it comes time to talk about like purple teams, how much of your time can you afford to give up or dedicate for your people to be part of the assessment? Because if you can't afford to give your people time, they're not going to get the benefit of it. Like if anyone's ever been at like a SANS training or something like that, and you see the guy that's running out to take a call every 15 minutes, like he didn't get anything out of that class because he was constantly doing work. And it's like, why did you spend all the money in the world to send them to SANS training and then make them work the entire time they were there? Man, I should have that meme. There's this meme of this like assault guy shoving someone in the face, and it's SANS, you know, to consumers, because like I love SANS, but man, it's so expensive and it's so hard for people to go. So if you're sending your people to SANS, another soapbox here, let them do the class, please. Yes. So this graph, I spent a lot of time putting it together. And you should appreciate the work that went into this. On the one axis that we have is program maturity. So on the left, if you don't have any maturity, you've never had a pen test done, never given your users any kind of phishing awareness training, you haven't hardened any systems, things like that, you probably want to start with an external pen test and maybe an internal pen test. Note that web apps aren't really in here. They're kind of a gray space. They don't really fit into what I'm talking about here. You should be doing those tests, absolutely. But I think like start out with external and internal testing. And probably do a couple rounds of testing. Now, I think you should probably do an external test every year. But they're pretty quick. They don't take a lot of time. We might do them, but not part of a red team, because that's going to send like, hey, someone's definitely knocking at the door. But we will do it as part of other tests. And we do those repeatedly, and you should do those. But if you've never had one, you're on the left. That's where you should start. After you've done a few assumed breach tests, you've done a few internal pen tests, internal and externals. You've done a few of those, you have fixed a lot of those recurring issues, like now you have a patching program and you've got an asset management program, so you know where all your things are and you know whether they're patched. Now it's time to start looking at the next level of maturity, and that might be an assumed breach or a pivot test, what some people call it, but starting with the assumed breach type of test and then maybe purple teams as well. And now you can get a lot of value for not a lot more money and start to fix those issues. And after you've had a few years of assumed breach tests, those start to get kind of diminishing returns depending on how you're scoping them and how your organization's appetite for changes, right? Like if things don't change a lot and you're really good about fixing the things that are there, the next year there's not as much. I've got to work harder. I'm still going to try to find you as much as I can, but maybe that attack surface is getting smaller and smaller. And at some point you're really good at your game and it's time to level up, and maybe some type of red team or adversary simulation. And maybe instead of doing a red team, we do like a red assumed breach. Let's start now as a trusted insider, but no one knows we're here except someone on the security team, a contact, and they get us a machine. Sometimes we have companies hire us and the security team doesn't know that the test is happening. The CFO hires us and wants us to do the test to make sure the security team's doing their job. Start out, we're doing a red team, we just are fast forwarding past all the initial access stuff so that we can focus on doing the test. I like this one as well. If you want a red team, you probably really just want to do the basics. And I don't say that lightly. Doing the basics is not easy. I grew up, I came from a system admin background. I spent years as a system administrator. I know what that life is like, so I'm never telling you in a recommendation that it's easy. You should just do this, because it's never that simple. But I think that focusing on the basics and getting really, really good at the basics, and unfortunately for blue teams, the basics are getting bigger and higher, right? Like now you've got 80 CS, and now it's 80 CS 1 through 8. And there's more and more of those things happening. So your job is getting harder. I do acknowledge that. Don't let me give you the impression that I think your job is easy. There's a reason I'm a red teamer. It's because I don't want to be a blue teamer anymore. So I don't want to be on call and have to answer the phone anymore. So I took the easy route out. But focus on the basics, and I think you'll get more value out of that than you will out of red teams to a point. This is not to say that red teams aren't valuable, because we have clients that do them and they very much appreciate them, but they are also very much prepared for them. So it's just a point in maturity, right? So if you want to do red teams, just be prepared to be bored, and then be prepared to try to do all of the things in the next 3 minutes so you don't get kicked out of the network. So make sure you know how to install persistence, and you know how to move laterally, and you know how to hide. So with that, this talk took longer, because I didn't have nearly as much caffeine. Screen eventually. I'm Mike at redsiege.com. I'm Hardwater Hacker on Twitter. You can also follow Red Siege on Twitter. You'll find out about our blogs that we have coming out. We've got a lot of good blogs being published, tools that we're writing and releasing those. I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to send me a request. I I encourage you to come to our Discord. A lot of people tell us they think our Discord's great. They found real value out of it. We think we've got a pretty good community there, and it's pretty active. It's not as big as lots, but we think it's pretty good. We'd love to see you there. We have something every Wednesday called the Wednesday Offensive. It's at 12:30 Central Time, where we have interesting people doing interesting things in the security space. It's 30 minutes top to bottom, no slides, no BS. Come on in and tell us what you're doing and why it's cool, and be prepared to answer questions, because it's kind of a free-for-all. We don't mute people's microphones, so they come off mute and they ask questions. And sometimes they're really good, and sometimes they're pretty funny. So we'd love to have you there as a guest. If you have something that you want to say, reach out to us. If you just want to tune in, we'd love to see you there. If you want the slides, redsiege.com/rethink. You can get a copy of the slides. I'm going to put this up there because otherwise JCon will get mad. But with that, we're at 45 minutes, the end of the presentation, time for questions. I do want to thank you for coming out at 8 o'clock at night. I really thought there'd be like 3 people here and there'd be drunk hecklers. So I really appreciate you being here. And with that, are there any questions? It's got to be a question somewhere. Yes. So the question is, how big are the companies that actually invest in the red team? They're generally larger companies because they have the budget. We do have some smaller companies that do more like the red assumed breach side that maybe are a little bit longer. But when you're talking at 8 to 12 weeks on an assessment, let's just call it, that's going to be at 10 weeks, $150,000, that it's going to cost someone to do that. It's a little less than that probably, but let's just call it that number, $150,000. If you're going to spend $150,000 on a test and not a product or something, you better be prepared. So it's generally larger ones, and we get smaller companies that come to us and they really want the red team. And I really try to spend a lot of time talking them out of red teams. Because I just don't think for most companies they provide the most value. As much as I've trash talked red teams, they are a lot of fun. They're just a lot of work, and you can be really bored for a while, but they're expensive. You got a hand there? Yeah.
Yeah, so how do you convey your findings, and how is that different from the traditional internal external pen test finding?
The findings are still kind of conveyed in the same report for red teams, assumed breach, internal, external, web app. We got kind of the same structure there. Executive summary, findings that has the issue, the affected systems, a description of that, recommendation on how to fix it. One thing that we do that not a lot of people do is we put in how to validate it as well. I think that's an important step. We give you the steps to say this is how you test it, so you don't have to pay me to come back and retest it and then go, oh, it's not fixed, and be like, well, now what? We paid for that time slot to retest it. We've retested and you didn't fix it. We give you whatever commands you need to do when we can. Sometimes it's really hard to do that, but even with things like cross-site scripting or some esoteric web app vulnerability, we try to give you the steps to reproduce it so that your engineers can actually just sit there and iterate and make sure they've got it fixed. And one thing I think that sets some companies apart, something that we do, is our methodology shows you not just the things that worked. We walk you through all the things we did, what worked and what didn't work. And we find that's valuable for clients because we've had clients come and tell us I've been trying to get the web app developers for years to implement this stuff securely and they haven't done it, and now they started and you validated my points because we showed we tested these things and we showed that your app rejected those things. If we had just said these are only the things that worked, they don't have any visibility, but that shows that hey, we've actually invested money in our security program and it works. So we do that. Purple teams, the output of that ends up looking different depending on the client. Sometimes it's a spreadsheet with just here's what we did, here's the time we did it, here's the MITRE mapping, successful, failed, or whatever the outcome was. Sometimes they want more details, sometimes they want that and kind of a more traditional pen test approach. It's not really findings out of there unless something comes up as part of our process and we go like, hey, wait a second, here's a problem, then we'll issue a finding. But purple teams don't generally have findings as much as they just have recommendations. So, but I think, hopefully that answered your question. So, got a question in the back there, yeah.
For purple teams, do you find, or what communication methods do you see working better collaboratively?
Yeah, so the question is what communication methods work well for purple teams? And a lot of the times, like we'll either have a Slack channel set up or we'll have a Teams channel set up. We think that works better than just daily calls because the blue team can ping us at any time and be like, hey, is this you? And we can confirm. And I've been in tests where like, hi, detected you doing this. And I was like, dude, I'm writing the report right now. I'm not doing anything. Like, you better go take care of that, you know? So we like to be like in a Teams channel where we can be really collaborative or sitting in the same room if we can, but doing the Teams channel or Slack, whatever, and kind of pretty much real-time communications where we keep them advised like, hey, I'm working on this now. And they'll be like, we don't see anything. Did you do something? And be like, yeah, actually, we just did this at this time from between this machine and that machine. You should have seen that. And they're like, we didn't see anything. It was like, okay, let's talk about why you didn't see that and what you can fix in your systems to help see that. And then we will rerun the test. And so we find like that, something where you can message back pretty collaboratively, pretty interactive, really works the best, I think.
Are those usually a day engagement?
Oh no, so the question was how long are purple teams? And usually they're a week to 2 weeks. We can do them like in a day. We've done smaller ones, but the team has to be available. They have to be focused on just that. Normally we would say like a week and let's dedicate 4 hours a day to the blue team or to the purple team and 4 hours a day to operations. So that way, like, you can take care of the daily fires that are happening, but still get value out of it. And meanwhile, during those 4 hours while they're doing other things, we can be prepping whatever the next thing it is that they want to test so we can make sure it works and then get back together and start doing the next set of tests. There's another question over here. Yeah.
I have two questions. One, have you seen like an increase over the years of companies that might have changed their minds about like, probably I've heard of people saying they see the price tag and they're like, we don't do that. And now they come back to you like 2 years later and like, well, we changed our mind. Or you see like just a general increase in like companies being like, we really need to do this and let's do it now.
Yeah, so the question is like, have we seen like maybe reluctance on price where in the past people didn't want to spend the money and now they want to spend the money? Definitely with more and more ransomware, people are willing to spend money. The unfortunate fact is a lot of companies, I think more than most, aren't willing to spend the money until something bad happens. And then once something bad happens, then they do it. But we are seeing like people that are getting insurance and insurance says you've got to do this and you can't just have a compliance checkbox test. Like you need to actually do some legitimate testing. So we are seeing people have more appetite for increased budget for sure. And what advice would I give someone who is getting into information security in the last few years? One, be curious and like always learning. There are so many things to learn. I know that early on in my security career, like I was working all the time and my boss kind of let me go until the point that like I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, dude, I don't know what to do. Like I worked 60 hours last week and there's just as much work. And he's like, yep. And there always will be. You need to figure out like what your tolerance is and know that there's always going to be more to learn. Like there's, just as an offensive person, the tradecraft, like every day there's new things coming out and I want to keep up, but I want to have a life too. So A lot of times, like 5 o'clock happens, like I'm not hacking, sitting in a lab doing something. Like I might make notes, maybe I'm scrolling Twitter for a bit, and I'll send myself links to research at a later time. So be curious, and the biggest thing I would say for people that are like getting in is do not neglect layer 8. Like, is what you know is great, and having a great resume and great credentials is great, but people is really where you're going to find the value. They're the people that are going to get you your next job. You can get, an introduction. You can get a referral where you can't make it through the HR filter, but you know a human and be like, hey, I'm applying for this job, and they can send your resume over to the person. I can't count. I've been a manager before where I'm not getting any resumes at all, and HR is sitting on 45 of them that they thought weren't qualified. And it was like, what is your purpose? Like, seriously. So really talk to people, be willing to ask questions, and be willing to be uncomfortable, and be willing to admit that you don't know. Like, you can't know all of the things, and you will, your clients will respect you far more when you say, you know what, I do not know the answer to that question, but I'm willing to research. So we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I know we've got another speaker. So if you have questions, you can catch me outside the door, be around this weekend. Hit me up on Twitter. Once again, that's me. Reach out and ask questions anytime, because thank you.